Hello everybody, and thank you for joining me. This is Ciara from CRT Designs, and today I have these two alcohol inked background cards, so let's jump right in. So I'm going to create the panels that I want to work on first. So I brought out my stitched rectangle dies just because I thought that would add a little bit of interest to the two panels, and I'm going to cut my smallest panel out of the Yupo. This, I always have a little bit of a struggle trying to get Yupo to cut nicely. So I did have it not quite cut just on one edge, and I just brought in my straight trimmer and cut that after the fact. You're going to see it here when I set it down that it's just got this one little piece here that just didn't cut through. I mean, you could run it back through your die cutting machine if you wanted to. I just find that it's easier to just trim it because it's straight, so I just lined it up on my trimmer and trimmed it down. This is mostly because I'm using the Magic Mat, but because this is such an open die, I don't want to use my chrome plate because that warps like open dies like these rectangles. So it mostly cut beautifully. It's just this one little side that it didn't. So it wasn't a big deal just to trim it off. And then I also brought in the largest of the dies to cut out two black matte pieces to go underneath my vibrant colored Yupo piece. I love the difference between the Yupo and the alcohol inks that are really glossy and really shiny, and then this like matte black cardstock. It isn't a matte black cardstock, it's just a black cardstock, but you get that really interesting play on the two of them that you have this super vibrant, movement in the watercolor, in the alcohol inks, and then you have this flat black piece on top of it and behind it. And I just think that kind of play on the two textures or two finishes is really interesting. So you guys will see that here as we get going, but I just thought I'd mention that because that is why I chose to do such a flat black behind and as this cutout piece here. So this is the Tim Holtz flower field die. I always want to call it the wild flowers die. I don't know why. It's the flower fields die. And I'm going to cut it out of that same black cardstock I used for the mat with the rectangles. And that's just, again, because I like to kind of repeat colors where I can, just for added interest. I find that kind of, it makes your layout more cohesive. And I'm going to cut it out twice because, as you guys saw from the starting picture, I am going to make two different backgrounds. And when I brought up my alcohol inks, you guys know that I've been loving playing with them if you've kind of been checking out my channel recently. I realized that I hadn't done like a full-on background with the inks in a little while. I've kind of been die cutting stuff and doing different things, like smaller things. And I just thought it'd be really fun to pull out some colors and just do this super vibrant, like big colored piece behind something that was kind of flat and wouldn't pull the focus. So it's kind of what I was thinking when I did this. And I pulled colors that I felt went really well together, but also kind of reminded me of like a sunset. The blue and purples are just because purples are my favorite color. But when I picked the yellow, orange, and pink, that was because I was thinking I might kind of try to create a sky in the background. But in the end, I kind of just went for a more fun alcohol inked style background with the kind of blooms of color and different interests. So that's kind of what I was thinking. So for these backgrounds, I am going to use, in that little blue bottle you just saw me eyedropper onto this Yupo piece, I have isopropyl alcohol. I believe it's like 99%, so it's quite strong. And alcohol is a lot of fun to work with if you want movement, because alcohol helps things move across the paper. You're going to see it really aggressively in the yellow, orange, and pink piece. I wasn't quite as liberal with it in this piece, but they won't necessarily help the colors blend. So that's where a blending solution comes in. So I do tend to use both together if I have a big piece, whereas if I have a small piece like those butterflies I did a little while ago, I wouldn't bring in the alcohol because I don't want that much movement, and because movement gives you less control. Though it creates stunning backgrounds, it gives you less control because the stuff just flows, right? So I tend to use both together when I do bigger backgrounds like this. So for the purples and blue, I used 3 different alcohol inks. One of them is a pearl, again, because I think that they just go stunningly together. So for that, I used Cloudy Blue, which I kind of used on the bottom mostly of the Yupo piece, Tranquil, which is a pearl, alcohol ink, and then purple Twilight is at the top of the panel. And I did my basic wash of all of the three colors. You kind of saw me start there. And then here I just add color where I feel it could use a little bit more, knowing that a portion of the bottom will be covered by that large flower die, the Flower Fields die that's quite tall. So I do know that some of this will end up getting covered up a little bit, but that's not really a concern. I think that it still turns out stunning, and I'm not really worried about it because there's so much height difference and holes in that Fields die that I know that you're going to still see quite a bit of the background. And I just worked between them until I was happy with the background, and then I set it aside. And then for this background, I have Sunshine Yellow, Splendor, which again is a pearl, that's the orange, and then Raspberry is the pink. This is kind of like my go-to for a yellow, orange, pink blend. I really like these three together. They're super vibrant. They play really well together, and you get really interesting variations in the color once they start to blend. So it is kind of neat. So you see me start with, again, that alcohol just to get that isopropyl alcohol to get that movement in the inks. And then once I've got that kind of movement going on, you can see here, I do bring in the blending solution to kind of get the colors to meld together better. I do find working together with both of them is better, especially if you're going to bring in pearls. Because the pearls have a mica built into the alcohol ink, if you don't use the blending solution to help kind of seal that pearl, the pearl can flake off. So just be aware of that if you've been using the alcohol ink pearls and you're having any kind of issues with them not really wanting to stay on the Yupo. It is because if you've only used alcohol ink, there's no binder to keep it on the paper. So hopefully that kind of makes sense, and that's a tip if anybody was struggling a little bit with that. But you see in this piece, there was a lot more movement as I was kind of bringing in my air blower and moving the colors around. It's because I got a bit heavy-handed with the isopropyl alcohol. And my Splendor, for whatever reason, it has a little bit of a granulation going on, which I love. I think that's just a really interesting texture. But if you don't like that, it's pretty easy to work out if you just add either some more alcohol or some more blending solution, and kind of, you can break up that bit of texture. It's just, I think that I didn't shake it well enough, and some of my mica kind of granulated on the Yupo paper as I was working with it. But it works out and it still looks stunning. So you can see here the two finished backgrounds. At this point, I did let them sit for a good hour. Ember climbed up on my lap while I was making these and promptly fell asleep. So then I promptly did nothing for an hour and just kind of sat there and hung out with her. So these are completely dry at this point. I wouldn't suggest adhering them before that, or you'll smear the alcohol inks as you see me kind of touching them to adhere them down to their black matte. I do find that it's better to let them dry naturally. You could bring in a heat tool if that's something that interests you. I generally don't, just because I find that if there's a little bit of wet blending solution or something left, you get a little bit more movement that isn't air controlled by me, and it just kind of gives you a little more interest, which I really like. And I generally am not in a crazy rush, unless of course I've come home from work and I have to make something, then it's a little bit different. But I don't know if I'd pick alcohol inks if I was going to do that. But I'd kind of like to have that extra movement of its own volition, just because it gives you an interesting look on its own. And then I did choose to stamp out some sentiments on these. I chose these to be a bit more of like an uplifting, supportive card rather than a thank you or a birthday card. I used the Tim Holtz Noteworthy stamp set for these, and I am using some Jet Black Stazon because it stamps on Yupo beautifully with no issues. So I've been kind of loving that for stamping. And I used two of them. I think I said Collect Beautiful Moments was on the blue one, and then this yellow one, I believe it's Make Today Amazing. And I thought that those would just be two really cool supportive cards that could easily be given to anybody in pretty much any scenario, that would just be really fun to receive. And then of course, just this super beautiful, vibrant background, and this kind of play on, this super glossy, shiny background with this super flat, matte black piece sitting on top of it. I love that kind of play of the two finishes. I think that it looks really neat. And I did bring in my fine tipped art glitter glue here to adhere this down. It looks like a lot of glue. That's only because it's white on black, but it looks like a lot of glue. It's actually very little. I'm trying really hard not to have it ooze out around the pieces of that Flowers Fields die, just because I don't want a whole bunch of glue sitting on top of the Yupo. It dries matte, so it shouldn't be noticeable, but it's just one of those things where like I try not to have a whole bunch of glue globs just oozing out around pieces that I've adhered. And this one, you're actually going to see that I put it down in the wrong spot. So I lift it. Luckily I realized it quite quickly. You're going to see that I'm going to actually cover the sentiment accidentally with that tall sprig of flower here. It's like in the center of the word. And once I realize it, I'm going to lift it up and shift it, because you see I've covered the whole end of the word today. So you couldn't even read it. So I did lift it and shift it. And luckily, because there's so little glue, it hadn't adhered yet, also because it's Yupo, so you do have to give it a minute to adhere. And because I caught it quickly enough, it was easy to just lift off and then kind of just shift over a little bit. But I make mistakes too. I always want to leave those in for you guys, because you can see pretty much anything you can do is fixable. Usually with very little hassle, even depending on what it is. I mean, of course, there are mistakes that I've made that aren't fixable, but it's pretty rare that I don't just try to fix whatever it is at that point. So then I'm just going to adhere them down onto their A2 bases. I'm almost running out of A2 bases. I'm going to have to make some more pretty soon. I like to sit on the couch beside my husband, and he's playing video games usually, or we'll watch a show or whatever. And then I cut and score a whole bunch of bases so that I have them ready when I want to sit down and just make things. Just the A2 size. I don't pre-cut any of my other bases, just generally the A2, because I mean, we pretty much, most people who are making cards do know the size of that. So it's kind of the easiest way for me to just have something prepped, because it's such an easy thing to prep. And then because I can't leave well enough alone, I did bring in some just super subtle but really pretty sequins, and just kind of added them mostly around the sentiment and then a little bit in the bottom corner. They just kind of help pull your eye a little bit, though there is quite a bit of movement in the background, which kind of helps you kind of look around the card. You guys know that I love all things shiny. So I think I just put 5 on, and these are the Vanilla Luster Fusion. They're very subtle and really pretty. You'll see them here in a second when I lift up the card, so you can kind of check out everything in detail, that they're just a really nice subtle addition. But they will take a minute to actually adhere, because now you're adhering a plastic sequin to plastic Yupo. So be aware of that. They will take a minute to actually adhere to the Yupo, but they do with no issue. You can see that I've gotten mine to adhere with little problems. But yeah, so I'm going to hold these up so you guys can check them out in all of their glory. I think they turned out really pretty. I think this would be a really fun card to receive. I love I know I say vibrant all the time, but I love how vibrant they are. But do you guys kind of see that difference between the super shiny matte, the background, and then that really matte flat black? I kind of love that juxtaposition between those two different finishes. I love how it looks. I think they turned out really beautiful. I'd love to know what you guys think. Leave me a like, leave me a comment, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. I do new videos every Monday and Thursday. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you again very soon. Bye-bye for now.